Good evening. To begin our time together tonight, I'd like to invite David Bassior to the podium. David is in his final year of studies at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. He co-organizes PEARL, Philadelphia Emerging Religious Leaders, with LTSP student Marcia Baxter. Please join me in welcoming David.
It feels odd to say, but Chag Sameach. Chag Sameach means, may it be a joyous festival. And yet, here we are on the first night of Hanukkah, counting not 8 nights, but I think, correct me if I'm wrong now, 130 days since the death of Michael Brown in Ferguson. We know about counting. As a Jewish white man in the United States, I've learned my history of Jews fleeing state violence for centuries and millennia. I stand here today in solidarity, saying Black Lives Matter. As a co-organizer of PEARL, I stand up here with PEARL cohort, Baptists, Lutherans, Methodists. There's many, many more to us, and allies. A few older, the elders that we stay connected to. And tonight we will light the Hanukkah candles to start this event in the sense of a multi-faith event, celebrating us all. And I will say that in Proverbs, we're told that the candle of God is the human soul. We're told in the Mishnah that one who destroys a single life is considered to have destroyed a world. Worlds have been destroyed. Hanukkah is a celebration of rededication after the destruction, to say we are still in this together, carrying on. And as I light these candles tonight, not just for Jews on Hanukkah, but for all of us saying Black Lives Matter, I invite us to stay dedicated, to rededicate to one another and to the work that is still to be done, for it is not totally after Ferguson yet. If you know it, sing along. If you don't, hum along. It's just nice to have our voices raised up together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu le'adlik ner shel Chanukah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu ruach haolam she'asa nisim la'orteinu bayamim hahem b'zman hazeh. Adonai Eloheinu ruach haolam shehechianu v'hiyamanu v'higianu lazman. And now everyone together. Who's granted miracles to our ancestors before us, all our ancestors, grant miracles, grant healing, grant rejuvenation to all of us here today in these days. Bazman hazeh. Thank you.
Blessed be the one who keeps us alive to do something about the fact that some of us ought to be alive or not.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, David. Now I'd like to invite to the podium our Dean, the Reverend Dr. Jayakiran Sebastian, for a brief word of welcome on behalf of the seminary, which this year celebrates our 150th anniversary.
My dear friends, there are cliches associated with words of welcome. And one such cliche is, we're glad you're here, sit back, relax, and enjoy this evening. Only the first part of this cliche is true this evening. Each and every one of you is more than welcome to this event. But we are not here to sit back, relax, and enjoy. We are gathered here at a somber and disturbing moment in the life of the nation. We are gathered here wondering whether hope has indeed died. We are gathered here wondering if the hopes of coming together across all kinds of boundaries, race, gender, religion, economic realities, sexual orientation, whether all those were empty and vacuous words. But nevertheless, we have come together. We have come together across boundaries, wondering together, hoping together, praying together, thinking together, acting together in a context where hope seems to be an elusive dream. And so, with the panel that is gathered here, with my colleague, Dr. John Paul, who has played such a major role in organizing this event and bringing us together, I repeat the first part of the cliche. Welcome to this place. Welcome to the place where public leadership and public mutual debate and public practice of what it means to be sensitive human beings in a broken and fragmented world is practiced. Welcome, and may we leave from here disturbed and ready to act.
Thank you, Dean Sebastian. And thank you all for being here tonight. One last introduction. I'm pleased to recognize the Bishop of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the Southeast Pennsylvania Synod, the Reverend Claire Burkett. Please join me in recognizing Bishop Burkett. Where are you, Bishop? Thank you. As the Dean indicated, my name is John Paul, and I'm the Peter Paul and Elizabeth Hagen Professor of History here at Lutheran. I study how religions legitimize violence and how religions can build peace. For over 40 years now, we've been living with the religiously legitimized, morally perverted, and spiritually distorted backlash to the 1960s, which means backlash to the civil rights movement that began in church basements and in seminaries in gatherings just like this one. That backlash began with opposition to the Equal Rights Amendment, which came within 3 votes of passing in 1983. That backlash expanded to the war on welfare, which has led us to the massive economic inequality that we live with today, and whose impact is felt in each of our lives in dramatic and incalculable ways. That backlash then extended itself into the scapegoating of gays and lesbians, and that backlash gave us the so-called war on terror that has wasted billions of dollars and produced so much moral injury and trauma and death. Finally, that backlash produced the new Jim Crow, and systemic violence that has stained our streets and sullied our souls and scared so many into submission. We have lived with the reign of fear, and too many of us have been silent. But in recent weeks, we see clear and compelling evidence that at last, the backlash may be ending. Because we are gathered here around three words. Say them with me. Black Lives Matter. Again, Black Lives Matter. One more time. Black Lives Matter. Note well that these three words are not a negation. They are an affirmation. At the center of these three words is lives. Our traditions unanimously tell us that each life is a gift to be cherished, cultivated, and cared for so that all life can flourish. So we gather together tonight to see how we might, together, move from fear to flourishing after Ferguson. So that is the subtitle of our gathering for this evening, Moving from Fear to Flourishing after Ferguson. It's not a utopian hope. It is our calling, our collective vocation. To flourish is the potential that exists in each new life, in each bright light that shines in the eyes of a newborn child. I truly look forward to hearing from each of our distinguished speakers on this topic of moving from fear to flourishing after Ferguson. I will introduce each of them in turn. I've asked each of them to prepare 10 to 15 minutes of remarks. We'll then have a good bit of time after they all have spoken for open discussion, I trust. I'll moderate that between the panelists and all of you. And I truly hope we do learn together tonight. Thank you once again so much for being here. Our first speaker is the Reverend Jewel Lee Herder. Full disclosure, Jewel is working on her PhD here at LTSP with me, focusing on abuses of power in church leadership. Jewel wrote her STM thesis here entitled Baptized and Betrayed, 3 case studies of charismatic authority and violence in American religious history. She's writing her dissertation on sexual violence and the violence of silence, Catholicism and clergy sexual abuse in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. Jewel's a member of the American Academy of Religion, as well as Philadelphia's Emerging Religious Leaders Pearl. She holds 2 associate in science degrees, one in registered nursing and the other in medical laboratory technology, along with a Bachelor of Arts and Letters and Sciences from Penn State Abington, and a Master of Arts in Theology with a concentration in Biblical Studies from Villanova University. Jewel's a member of 4 honor societies. Her roots are in the African American Baptist tradition, where she received her certificate of license to the gospel ministry at the age of 17. Please join me in welcoming Jewel Herder.
Thank you. Tonight we're talking about from fear to flourishing after Ferguson, and I'm going to concentrate a little bit on the origin of that fear and distrust of police officers in the African American experience. Southern trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. Pastoral scene of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth, scent of magnolia, sweet and fresh. Then the sudden smell of burning flesh. Here is fruit for the crows to pluck. For the rain to gather, for the wind to suck, for the sun to rot, for the trees to drop, here is a strange and bitter crop. I was reading James Cone's The Cross and the Lynching Tree, and this rendition of Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit was in there. The lyrics were written in 1930 by Abel Maripold, also known as Lewis Allen, a white Jewish school teacher from New York City. The first thing that came to my mind when I saw the video of the aftermath of the August 9th shooting of Michael Brown by a white police officer, Darren Wilson, was Billie Holiday's rendition of Strange Fruit. This strange fruit of the South, where the black bodies of mostly men, but women and children as well, even unborn children, who were hung, beaten, burned, shot, dismembered, decapitated, drowned, dragged, raped, tortured, and left hanging from trees, or bodies and body parts left in the streets for hours, even days. The spectacle of lynching. Lynching, a violent and shameful part of American history, is seldom ever talked about. The silence, complicity, and indifference of the perpetrators and hundreds to thousands of cheering bystanders is incomprehensible. Souvenir photos were taken of some of the town's most respected members posing next to the hanging black bodies. Police officers, firefighters, lawyers, judges, bankers, teachers, business owners, religious leaders, and members of their congregations. These photos were admired and happily shared with family and friends near and far. Even some white women and children participated in the murders and cover-ups of nearly 10,000 unarmed black people in the United States with impunity. These were crimes born out of the worldview of white superiority and the devaluation of black lives, the fear and distrust of white people in general, and the police and judicial system at the state and federal level in particular was ingrained in our African American experience, in our stories that continue to be passed on from one generation to the next. Yet, as Sherilyn Ifill says in her book, On the Courthouse Lawn, Confronting the Legacy of Lynching in the 21st Century, that few whites today understand the long-term effect of the tacit or explicit complicity, the silence and open participation of their forebears in the lynchings and near lynchings in towns throughout the United States. I and many others assume that in the 21st century, lynchings no longer occur, and strange fruit no longer hang from trees or lie in the streets, until I viewed the video of the aftermath of the shooting death of an 18-year-old teenager, Michael Brown. Brown's bleeding body was left to lie in the street like roadkill for 4.5 hours on a warm summer day for all the community to see. Police on the perimeter of the crime scene seemingly indifferent to the relatives and residents of the community who were gathered nearby in shock and outraged. Until I viewed the video of the confrontation, death, and aftermath of Eric Garner, 43 years old, who died from a chokehold and chest compression by a white police officer, Daniel Pantaleo, on July 17, 2014, his lifeless body lying on the ground after stating he could not breathe 11 times, hands still handcuffed behind his back, no one performing CPR, police standing around looking seemingly indifferent to the black body lying on the ground. In fact, at one point, Pantaleo is seen waving to the camera. Until I viewed the video of the shooting death of Kajim Powell in his 20s on August 30th, 2014 in St. Louis by 2 white police officers who fired multiple rounds, 10 or 12, at a man pacing slowly with his arms down, asking the officers to kill him. seemingly indifferent to the fact that they killed this man in broad daylight in front of residents of the community who knew this man to have had a mental illness, proceeded to roll over his limp, bleeding black body and handcuff his arms behind his back as if to cover up the fact that they just used excessive force on this man for no reason. No medical assistance given or sheet placed over his body. Until I viewed the video of the shooting of Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old boy who died from a gunshot wound to the left side of his abdomen in a Cleveland park by a white police officer, Timothy Lohaman, on November 22, 2014, who fired the deadly shot within 1.5 to 2 seconds after driving up on the grass in front of Tamir and exiting his car. While Tamir's wounded and bleeding body lay on the ground, neither of the two officers present rushed to give him any medical attention. In fact, they are seen walking about with guns still drawn. With his 14-year-old sister, when she ran to her brother's side, she was handcuffed and placed in the patrol car. When his mother arrived, she saw Tamir's 16-year-old brother held against the patrol car, surrounded by police. In fact, according to the Associated Press, as his mother was going to the side of her bleeding son, she was pushed by the officers who told her to chill out or she was going to be placed in the police car as well. These black males were all described as an imminent threat to the life of the police officers. Michael was even said to have growled and looked like a beast, a demon, Hulk Hogan and Goliath, a dehumanized monster. The arresting police officers attribute their use of deadly force to the victims resisting arrest. So far, neither of the police officers in the first two cases have been indicted by the grand jury. Tamir's case is still pending. And let's not forget that black women, too, have been victims of excessive use of force by police officers recently. Just last year, on October 3rd, 2013, an unarmed dental hygienist from Connecticut, Miriam Carey, 34 years old, was shot 5 times from behind, ending a police chase in Washington, D.C. The autopsy report released 6 months later revealed that she had been hit once in the back of her head, 3 times in her back, and once in her left arm as she was fleeing in her black Infiniti, they stressed that, car from numerous police officers and ununiformed Secret Service personnel in Washington, who were considered unjustified in using extreme and deadly force. The pursuit was aired live on cable networks. She too was seen as a threat, a possible suicide bomber and terrorist. Her sister said she had been diagnosed with postpartum depression, with psychosis. But yet there's so much fear, Sherilyn Ifill states that when one takes into account that nearly 5,000 lynchings took place in the United States between 1885 and 1960, it becomes clear that the damage caused by lynching in black communities throughout the United States is both widespread and deep. Indeed, more than the poll tax, the grandfather clause, and Jim Crow segregation, lynching and the threat of lynching helped to regulate and restrict all aspects of black advancement, independence, and citizenship in many small towns for half a century. The fact that lynching was often accompanied by a kind of racial pogrom in which, in addition to beating and murdering blacks, whites burned black businesses and homes. The United States was built on a foundation of Protestant Christianity and white superiority, the oppression or forced servitude of enslaved Africans and African American peoples for the prosperity and advancement of the white race. In 1865, the Civil War and the ratification of the 13th Amendment freed slaves in the North and South, but not from the oppression of racial discrimination and inequality. That would not be realized for decades. In The Cross and the Lynching Tree, James Combs reminds us that the 2-time governor and United States Senator from South Carolina, proclaimed that lynching is a divine right of the Caucasian race to dispose of the offending blackamoor without the benefit of jury. Also, the Supreme Court Chief Justice Roger B. Taney declared in the Dred Scott versus Sanford decision that Dred was not a citizen and voided the Missouri Compromise of 1820. The authors of the Constitution had viewed all blacks as beings of an inferior order and altogether unfit to associate with the white race, either in social or political relations, and so far inferior that they had no rights which the white man was bound to respect. This decision was the catalyst that led to the Civil War, 1861 to 1865. However, for many whites, whether in the North or South, that conviction was unaffected by the end of slavery. When Reconstruction ended in 1877 and the United States government withdrew the last federal troops from the South, former slaves were left without federal protection and were soon increasingly segregated from civic and social life. This forced segregation, termed Jim Crow or North American apartheid, was upheld by the United States Supreme Court in Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896, which legalized segregation and the ideology of separate but equal, separate facilities but equal service and quality of education. This was not reversed until the United States Supreme Court ruled in Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954 that racially separate schools were inherently unequal. This decision ordered the end of separate schools. Unfortunately, in the South, schools, civil, social, recreational, and religious facilities and institutions remained segregated. Then on August 24th, 1955, a 14-year-old teenager, Emmett Louis Bo Till, was lynched in Mississippi for whistling at a white woman in a store. Cohn describes Martin Luther King Jr. stating that it was one of the most brutal and inhuman crimes in the 20th century. Till was beaten beyond recognition, shot in the head, and thrown in the Tallahatchie River, weighted down with a heavy gin fan. His cold-blooded murder awakened the consciousness of a nation to the atrocity of lynching and incited the civil rights movement in the 20th century. The first act of resistance came from his mother, Mamie Till Bradley, who refused to allow this heinous act, like so many similar cases, to remain in the shadows or to fade from public memory. When Emmett's body was brought back to Chicago, she insisted that the sealed casket be opened for a 3-day viewing, exposing his battered and bloated corpse so that everybody in the world could see what they had done to her son. So too, the excessive force used by police officers that took the lives of Michael Brown, Eric Gardner, and Tamir Rice, and others, along with the failure of the grand juries to indict the officers involved in the first 2 incidents, have once again galvanized the nation to demand justice for their lost lives and others throughout the United States, because Black lives matter. In fact, all lives matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Jewel, for that historical overview. Hard to hear, but sets things in context for us. Our second speaker is Imam Muhammad Abdul Alim. Imam Abdul Alim is the Imam Emeritus of Masjid Allah, Inc., located in a building in West Oak Lane that began its existence as a synagogue, served for several decades as a church, and now is a beautiful Islamic center and prayer center as well. I mean, that's America at its best. Imam Abdul Alim has studied Al-Islam and the Holy Quran extensively for over 40 years. He promotes the religious philosophy of Imam W.D. Muhammad and is an avid proponent of community engagement and ecumenical discourse. And I can say from personal experience, we took our class to prayer on Friday. He's an amazing preacher. Please join me in welcoming Imam Muhammad Abdul Alim.
I would like to begin with peace be upon you. Assalamu alaikum. Shalom. Dear people, I want to share with you a few thoughts. As I listened to the presentation that was before me, I guess they kind of it fit right in with the flow of things, because what I want to talk about is, I'm going to share with you, my topic is called Wake Up to Human Life. What we have is a rehearsal of the problems. And I've been to different situations and different settings and circumstances, and we continually rehearse the problem. But I've heard very few people give recommendations for solutions. So I hope tonight, inshallah, God willing, I want to share with you some solutions that we have been applying. And this conversation that I'm going to share with you begun about 44 years ago, maybe a little more than that. As a young man, I grew up in Harlem, New York. And in the early 60s, we, as a Muslim in the then nation of Islam, we always took the position that it's better to build than to beg. All right? Because until you build your own life, you're always going to be a victim. And then I had a very unusual experience in that in 1968, I'll never forget this, in April of that year, as many of you may remember, Dr. King was assassinated, April the 4th. Well, I was a young man then, and I always wanted to go to college, but being one of 11, that was out of the, financially out of the picture until Dr. King was killed. And then, just to tell you a little story, the recent president of Philadelphia University, James Gallagher, at that time was a graduate student. And he came into Harlem during it was a hot summer that summer, very hot. Not weather-wise, but socially. And he recruited us to attend the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Mass., where as my roommate, I had a lot of discussion with a man by the name of Clarence Thomas, Justice Thomas. We had many debates on how African peoples who live in America, called African Americans, at that time I think we were, if it was the 60s, I think we were Afro-Americans. If it was late 60s, early 70s, we were Black Americans. If it was early 60s, we were Afro-Americans. If it was in the 50s, we were Negro, and before that, we were colored. So we weren't really, you gotta know what decade you're talking about, so you can identify how we were being identified. So we used to have these discussions, and as I used to always make the point to Clarence, and in a book entitled The Fraternity by Diane Brady, some of you may want to pick this up, they talk about the young men that was recruited to Holy Cross. They talk about Clarence, they talk about Ted, who was the big lawyer for, what's the name, Scooter Libby. Yeah, he was his lawyer. And we kept in touch, and so my point is that I always held a position as a Muslim that until you identify the problem, you cannot come with, after you identify the problems, you must begin to come with solutions. Otherwise, you have this cyclical, seeing the problem come over and over again. Because as the young lady spoke before me, made it very clear, this is no new problem. This is an old and ancient problem. The problem started when our ancestors were taken from Africa and brought to America. We became a canary in democracy, I call it. Because the more we are treated, it tells whether or not all what we write about in the Declaration and in the Constitution, how real is it until those people who did not come on the Mayflower, who did not come because they wanted to come, and have yet to establish themselves, even though they are one of the longest standing ethnic groups in America. What has kept them back from being established? Why are they always victims? So that's what I want to talk about in the time that I'm given. First, let me say that if we look at human life, all right, I want you to think about that, human life. The language of this country has been a language that talks about human language, human life, yet plays on color-conscious descriptions. Black, white, all right, and now we still have the black-white. And I don't want to disappoint any of you who consider yourself white, but the color that I learned that you were closest to is pink. All right? No, I'm serious. So if you look at, go look in the mirror, you don't look like that white piece of paper. You look pink. So I think that we need to understand, we say black, white, what are we really talking about? Because I think that somehow we have used language to enslave ourselves to some misconceptions as to our importance in God's great creation. All right? We are human. I want to repeat that. We are human. And we have allowed ourselves to be played in a color-conscious scheme that have us thinking that somehow, even our title says Black Lives Matter, it would have seemed to me that we're saying that what the other lives don't matter. Why do we have to say that Black Lives Matter unless something has happened in our collective psychic that says somehow this life don't matter? Am I right? I mean, for you to have to make that you're not saying white life matter, brown life matter, yellow life matter. Something has happened, and we want to talk about that today. Even though we are making progress along this road, until we collectively, especially us as religious leaders, look into the collective religious history and identify the troublemaking ghosts that have laid dormant in our collective psychic and continue to bother us, that we can't have a serious open dialogue about the problem of white supremacy established by whitened God, visible whitened God that established white supremacy. Because I ask the question, how will you feel if for 300 years my image as a black man, as a Negro, was placed before you as God, and then and you was enslaved by that image, and then on the day you get freedom, I tell you that the image that enslaved you is also the image of your salvation. You know, I asked this question at a synagogue on Old York Road. I said, how would myself, if I was a Jewish, and after experience Nazi Germany, someone told me that Hitler is now your image of salvation, and the swastika is your symbol for salvation. You know, one of the older people, a couple of them actually fell out, because even to think about that brought great trauma to the collective psychic of that group. So I'm saying that to say that when we talk about the problems, we talk about the situation, we must be willing, if we hope to solve the problem, go a little deeper beyond the color-conscious terminologies and look at what is bothering the collective psychic of the American public. And I submit to you that until we can, as religious people, because all religions hold human life as sacred. But think about this, let me give you an example. Now today, a terrible thing happened. 146 children were murdered by a radical Islamic group. All right? But that was not the lead-off story of the news. That was like fourth or fifth. Discussion was on, I think the first news was, I think it may have been the 6 people that were killed, which is a terrible thing too, yes. But how many times have we made a point to highlight, even if an airplane crashed, we want to know not how many human beings died, but how many Americans died. You mean to tell me that our life is somehow more valuable? That say if 100 people died on a plane, they want to know were there any Americans? So, dear people, we're making progress, but we cannot get to the solution until we go deeper into the problem. And even though we have, as I say again, going through these news cycle situations with people of African descent, we'll do this for a couple of months, and then maybe by next year, when there's no longer Martin, no longer Brown, there'll be somebody else in the news who either was murdered or either was, wrongly assassinated, really, public assassination by the police department. But I believe that these things can help us, because great tragedy brings out the real human being. Because if you look at what has happened, yes, there was demonstration in Ferguson, but there were demonstration of people who were not in Ferguson, not African Americans, all right, who stood up and began to recognize that something is wrong. Now, many of them, as I know, just as we did in the 60s, we'll protest and demonstrate, but at the end of the day, we'll go home and wait until the next tragedy, and we'll come out again, and we'll have meetings like this. But if we hope to make a difference, really make a difference, we got to engage each other in some very healthy dialogue about how we view each other as human beings. All right? That's what's needed. I mean, for those of us who sit here tonight, we're going to go home, we're going to hear the speeches and probably ask a few questions, and then we'll go back to business as usual in a few weeks, because Ferguson will no longer be in the news. It'll be something else. A while ago, it was Ebola. Now, Ebola now is on page 9. All right? We must be willing, as people of faith, to bring the focus back to human life. Because I believe even the police officers are suffering from what I'm talking about, because somehow they don't see the life of, and not just African Americans. I've seen them kill people who have mental problems and shoot them because the person couldn't understand what they were saying. We have militarized our police department, and we have not educated our policemen how to subdue a suspect without killing them. They take their gun out. They take their gun out to kill. They don't take out the taser or the maze. No, they take it out to kill. We can make progress if we learn to respect human life and have a healthy dialogue concerning how we see each other as human beings. That language is missing because we talk too much in this preconceived language environment that would not allow our lives, that allow our minds, to speak to what our lives really yearn for, which is the understanding of our collective situation. Human life is challenged today. When there's a real global problem, we don't care about religion, we don't care about color. If there's an earthquake or tsunami, we're not looking at what's your race. You need help. And I pray to God that it doesn't take a world catastrophe to make us all return to our common human essence. All right? I pray that we learn to see each other as human beings, and we learn to address the overriding issues that affect human beings, because the people of Ferguson, the people of any of the African American communities around the world are black because they are lacking empowerment. They are black because they're not privileged to use the resources that have been so scientifically stolen from them over the centuries by people of European descent. Let's know the history. For history is best qualified to reward our research. And we know that they were conquered by subliminal religious messages before they gave up their land and gave up their wealth. So as I conclude, we must, if we want to really solve this problem, follow a strategy and a methodology that we find in Scripture. Let's not leave God out. Let's not leave God out, because we as human beings must return to our common human essence and feel comfortable with each other in spite of our color, our racial identity, our sexual orientation, whatever term you want to call it, but that's all built upon your common human identity. And if you don't have that right, everything else is a sickness, because you hold up things that are transitory. Because I'm sure if you get sick and you need a blood transfusion, you need to ask them what color the blood is coming from. All you want to know is, can I get the right blood to help me get better, doctor? So this is our issue, dear people. We must return to common human values. We must wake up to human needs. Yes, Black lives matter, but human life matters even more. Thank you. Peace.
Thank you, Imam Abdul Alim. Thank you. Our third speaker is Natasha Warner. Ms. Warner has over 25 years of experience working for a federal law enforcement agency with 20 years of specialized experience in the field of community relations and public affairs. In her role as an employee relations professional, she coordinates upward mobility, cultural competency, equal employment opportunity, diversity and inclusion initiatives, and many more. Natasha is actively involved with creating successful community, business, religious, media, and civic partnerships in efforts to leverage community awareness and involvement to reduce the effects of crime, drugs, and violence. She's a graduate of Rosemont College with a BA in Business Communication and Webster University, where she earned her MA in Communication and Media Management. Natasha is the recipient of many awards and citations. She's a loving wife and devoted mother of 3 children. In her spare time, she wrote to me, this city girl enjoys her newfound passion of urban farming and hydroponics. Natasha's an active member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority, and I think we may hear some of those strategies that the Imam was asking for from our next speaker, Natasha Warner. Please join me in welcoming her.
Well, Dr. Paul ruined my joke that I was going to tell. I was going to say, yesterday I celebrated my 22nd birthday for the 22nd time, oh, sorry, 21st time. But he mentioned that I've been with the Department of Justice for the past 25 years, so that joke won't fly now. Apart from my voice, I'm a little under the weather. But one of the things that I wanted to do was just kind of take you back to 1988 as a high school student at Benjamin Franklin High School. And one of the things that happened is one day the recruiter came to the school to recruit some high school students to work full time. And at that point, I didn't really, I saw myself working there, but I figured I would stay for about 5 years. And I like to tell people they kidnapped me. But what I want to say is, if I fast forward now, 26 years later, I see why I'm here. I see why I am blessed to be in this position so that, I can be out there on the front line with the people that look like Mike Brown, that look like me, so that hopefully we can provide solutions. And that's one of the things that I pride myself on, is going out and being the change that I want to see. And so I'm spoiled in that regard, in that, yes, I get paid to do that, but I also, this is my life, this is my passion, because there I go. And so one of the things that I wanted to share with you, as far as some of the, the Imam spoke of solutions, but I wanted to just give you, as well as the speaker before us came and spoke about, the problem. But some of the other issues that we have to begin to address is the wealth gap in our community. And so when we have these forums, Black Lives Matter, and I truly agree that all lives matter, but we also have to have a conversation where those Black lives are in the audience. We can't continue to have these kinds of conversations where we don't address the elephant in the room. And so the other issue is, when I talk about the wealth gap, we have to talk about the unemployment, the alarming unemployment rates. We have to talk about the lack of trust that goes back to the civil rights era and all the things that occurred during that time. So we need to talk about those things and get all of those things out on the table so that we can begin to move forward. We also need to talk about the lack of educational resources. As I mentioned, that I am a graduate of a public school, and once again, there I go, but for the grace of God, it's just, and once I graduated, I realized how much I didn't know and how much I had to teach myself. And one of the things that I'll go back even further, growing up in the city, I loved, and I still do love to read. And I know many of you are not too old to remember, reading is fundamental. And so what I will, and this is what I tell the kids when I go out and I speak with them, is reading takes you places. Reading takes you back to, as the speaker before us talked about, all the things that occurred so that you know your history. And I believe firmly that when you know better, you have to begin to use your voice better. So when you're on social media, it's great to catch up with friends and colleagues and family and talk about the Eagles game and who lost and all that, but it's also good to use your voice to affect positive change. We also have to talk about the mass incarceration rates, or also the pipeline to prison. And so far too many of our young people are looking at, incarceration as if it's a badge of honor. And I don't just say that because I hear that. I know that because I hear it when I hear it from their voices. When I was at wasn't a school, but it was a GED program last week, I had one young man who told me that his career goal is to be a big-time drug dealer. And so I encouraged him, I applauded him to do so legally, to become a pharmaceutical representative and get paid good money. And I'm telling you, and they don't even think about it. I asked them, how many of you like guns? And so their hands, he kind of was embarrassed. And then finally I said, be honest, keep it 100. And that means keep it real. And I said, do you like guns? And he said, yes, I like guns. I like shooting them. And I told him, do you realize that you can get paid $150,000 being a firearms instructor? Do it legally. And it was like, really, I can do that? So I think one of the things that we have to do is get out there into the community and become mentors. It doesn't take anything to do that but just time and patience and honesty. And so one of the other things that I wanted to mention, I know that we have some people in here that don't have as much hair, but there are a lot of us in here who have a lot of gray hair. And in each strand of gray hair, that's wisdom. And so as I was driving up here, and of course, no, I'm not 22, and I was thinking about that, and I was saying, you know what, I would love to be 22 with the 43-year-old mindset. I would love to have the knowledge that I had back then. And one of my favorite, well, I'll say, my favorite people in this world are seasoned people. I love older people because they have such knowledge, and I just love to be able to sit at the helm of an 83-year-old woman and just grasp all that information and that knowledge. And look at all the mistakes that she made, and then she can tell us what to do. So I say that the solutions are in this room. I say we all have the solution if we begin to have dialogue, but not just amongst each other, but go out into the street, go out into the community, and speak to the people who have these problems so they can tell you what those small solutions are. And oftentimes, as it was mentioned, I am a gardener now, oftentimes it's by planting one little seed. And people who follow me on Facebook, et cetera, they know I'm this super duper nerd now in terms of farming because I am a city girl. I grew up in the projects in South Philadelphia. And so I've never grown anything other than a little styrofoam cup. And so when I planted a seed in my backyard, I did a raised bed. I built it myself with my daughter. And I put the seed in and I watered it. And 2 or 3 days later, I was jumping up and down, and my husband was looking at me like I was crazy because green stuff was coming out of the ground. Now, to you people who grew up on farms, that may sound normal, but for me, I couldn't even understand that. And so what I started doing is processing that in my head. Imagine if we tell our children that they can plant seeds, water it, nurture it, and watch it grow. And that's the solution for all of us. That's just so simple, but it's such a big thing. But we really have to begin to plant those seeds. So when we see problems arise in our community that's going on in Ferguson, that's going on in Philly, that's going on in New York, it's just those small seeds, that one phone call to a school in an urban area to say, what can I do? Can I come out and I read to these children? Can I come out and show them that I love them? Because I'm telling you, I have worked with some of the most troubled kids, and they all hang on me as if I'm a celebrity. And it breaks my heart that when I was at a school about 3 weeks ago, the kids were pulling on me, and one little girl said, please take me home with you, please, please, please take me home with you. And That's sad because they want love. And we can give that to them. And so these problems, they seem monumental, but if we would only go out there and teach our young men how to address a police officer when you see them, because that's that bravado. And so we have a lot of young men like, I'm hard, I'm bad, you're not going to tell me what to do. Nobody's going to tell me what to do. So when they do encounter a police officer, they know what to do. And we also have to go out and, of course, train our law enforcement officers. When you have two males, sometimes that male testosterone, it just gets the best of them. I'm not backing down. No, you back down. And therein lies the problem. So we have to teach our young people how to respect authority. They don't know how. So how can we expect them to? They don't respect their parents because that's just not normal in their homes. So we have to get out there, whatever that solution is, plant that one little baby seed, pour a little water on it, and watch it grow. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha. Our fourth speaker is Rabbi Arthur Ocean-Waskow, PhD, founder in 1983 and director of the Shalom Center. And here's the website, www.theshalomcenter.org. He's the recipient of the first Lifetime Achievement Award from Teruah as a human rights hero, and that's a recent award, 2014. One of his earliest books of 22 bears the title From Race Riot to Sit-In, 1919 and the 1960s. That was published in 1965. His most recent books include Freedom Journeys, The Tale of Exodus and Wilderness Across Millennia, which was co-authored with Rabbi Phyllis Ocean Berman. His newest arrest of about 22 was at the White House before Passover and Palm Sunday 2013 in an interfaith action demanding swift and vigorous climate healing. Please join me in welcoming Rabbi Arthur Ocean-Waskow.
Shalom.
Shalom.
Salam.
Salam.
Peace.
Peace.
And earth.
Earth.
Right. That's not a conventional greeting yet, but it ought to be, and I hope it will be. I think I want to start with that book, From Race Riot to Sit-In. The first half of it drew on my doctoral dissertation. It was about a whole series of race riots in 1919. And in almost all of them, the pattern was the same. It was as if the racism of American society had piled up sloshing stores of gasoline in every black community. And when the police, and it was always the police, acted as racist as the society in general did, that was the spark. And here we are now, thank God, and thank Martin Luther King, and thank Ella Baker, and many others. Almost entirely, the response to the spark has been vigorous, assertive, nonviolent action. The second half of my book. And in some ways, I feel profoundly depressed that here we are again. And on the other hand, I feel greatly encouraged. Why? You. That's why. Us. That's why. In the 1960s, the country responded to police brutality by isolating it. It was Bull Connor in Birmingham. It wasn't us. It wasn't Staten Island. That's in the north. This time, there is a national response to what people perceive as a national disease. It's not like the disease is only aimed at blacks, at Hispanics, at Native Americans, but it is sharpest there. The disease is the disease of domination. And I want to trace a little bit earlier and then now. The toughest origins clearly were in our society the genocide of many Native American communities and the imposition of slavery on Africans and African Americans. But let me leap those centuries. I want to keep one teaching from those centuries up. I can hardly, even now, get my head and my heart around the teaching of a slaveholder named Thomas Jefferson, who, looking at slavery, said, "I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just." I can barely figure out what it means to have been a slaveholder who could look at slavery and say that. But what he said was true. And we still must tremble for our country when we reflect that God is just. Now, what has the disease, the deadly disease of domination, what has it been doing more recently? Well, we're here because all over the country people are responding to the failure of the so-called American justice system to act justly in dealing with the police killing of unarmed civilians. But where are we? Where is the Department of Justice, or the FBI, or the President of the United States in bringing to justice people who have announced with glee that they committed torture? And that some of those they tortured died. So no statute of limitations applies to murder. What would happen to an FBI agent who arrested Dick Cheney for murder in the course of ordering torture? And why did the President of the United States say, well, that's the past and we got to go forward? How come we don't do that with every murder? That's part of the disease of domination. Short of killing someone, maybe some would say even not short of that, torturing someone is the ultimate exercise of domination over a human being, a human body. We heard about the massive incarceration, mostly, though not entirely, directed at young black men. I think there is a badge of dishonor, but it doesn't mostly belong to most of those young men. It belongs to a Congress that wrote the drug laws that were skewed deliberately to put more black men who used a drug than the same kind of use of a drug by white young men. It belongs, that badge of dishonor belongs on a Congress, a government that has structured our economy so that there are millions of people, more black than in proportion than not, but not more black in numbers than not, who can't get jobs. They didn't lose their jobs the way people talk, like I lost my car keys out in the street. Those jobs were robbed from them. And I don't call it unemployment anymore. I call it disemployment, because unemployment sounds like some poor son of a bitch stubbed his toe on the way to work. But disemployment says that somebody took the jobs away. And that structure is part of the disease of domination. At the apex of our justice system sits a Supreme Court that, on the one hand, said, hey, you're a billionaire, spend $1 billion if you feel like it on the next election. You're young and in a campus where your state government has said, oh, you ain't allowed to vote here, or you're old enough that you can't find your birth certificate. You were born, clearly, but you can't find the certificate saying so. Or you're poor and you can't spend the time and the money, especially the time away from work, to go get your photo ID. Well, you can't vote. So an election becomes an auction, not an election. That's part of the disease of domination. If you're a woman in the armed services who's raped by a superior officer, you're not likely to have anybody do anything about it. If you're a student at an upstanding college or university and you're raped by another student, maybe, but not likely, will the college or the university do anything about it except to urge you not to go to the police. And the ultimate version of the disease of domination, the earth is being shattered by giant corporations that burn fossil fuels and burn the planet by doing that for incredible profits and won't stop. In fact, they use their profits to buy members of Congress so nobody will make them stop. So I agree that we need to talk about alternatives. What was the crucial alternative in the civil rights movement? It was what the sit-ins did. They didn't go to Congress. They didn't bomb the segregated restaurants. They said, we envision integration, so we're going to do it. And you guys have to figure out what to do with us. You can put us in jail, you can kill us, you can change the law. And in fact, all three of those things happened. The dreamers, what did they do? They did the same thing. What the sit-ins did was take a vision of the future and embody it in the present. What was it? Be the vision that you want. What is it?
Be the change.
Be the change that you want to achieve. Okay. So, being the change is what the dreamers did. They said, we're not going to hide anymore, and we are not going to let you deport us without a direct challenge. We're in public now, who we are. And they changed the whole, not the debate in the country, but they changed what the president was willing to do. Things that he had said over and over again, oh, I can't do that stuff. He did. And he didn't do it because some law professor convinced him it was okay. He did it because he was being challenged, even harassed, heckling the President of the United States. Really? So the question we have to face is, what does it mean to be the future that we seek? What does it mean in terms of the police? To some extent, it may mean changes in the national laws and people on the streets and the highways blocking a kind of portable, mobile Occupy movement. If Occupy meant that you took over a space and you stayed there until finally the police chiefs around the country caucused by telephone and email and decided, well, that's enough, that's over. Well, what does it mean then not to stay in one place, but to move? To move from place to place. And when the police show up, you move somewhere else. But always you are challenging the country, the public, as well as the police and the government. You are challenging everybody to notice, to pay attention, and to make change happen. So, what is the basic response to the domination disease? It's community. It's not domination. It's community. It is creating at the grassroots of America the communities, the neighborhoods that are able to stand up. Maybe it means, in some places, maybe it means creating real community-controlled police, not the PR work of the police department that says, oh, we're going to send out people and they're going to meet in little, schools and classrooms. But what about the community controlling the police in their own neighborhoods? Maybe it means a welling up of co-ops, of credit unions, of places where we put our money and our energy that are not going to the disease of domination. Where do we bank? Are those banks investing in the creation of disemployment? Are those banks investing in the burning of the world? Where do we bank? And might we decide to move our money? Those are the kind of questions that I think are the necessary alternatives. Shalom.
Shalom.
Salam.
Salam.
Peace.
Peace.
Earth.
Wow. Thank you, Rabbi Waskow. Our final speaker is Bishop Dwayne Royster. Reverend Royster is founding pastor of Living Water United Church of Christ, located in the Oxford Circle neighborhood of Philadelphia. Bishop Royster has served in ministry for the past 18 years in a variety of positions and denominations, including the United Methodist Church, the Mennonite Church, and Baptist traditions. In addition, Reverend Royster is the executive director of Power, Philadelphians organized to witness, empower, and rebuild, which has grown to be one of the most effective grassroots organizing agencies in the cities. And I see somebody waving a card up there. In case you're interested in more information, you can go there too. Bishop's a graduate of Geneva College's Center for Urban Theological Studies with a Bachelor of Science degree in Urban Ministry Management, has studied at Eastern Baptist Theological Seminary, and is a graduate of the Lutheran Theological Seminary at Philadelphia with a Master of Arts in Religion degree with a specialization in the African American Church, in one class, I think, with me at least, anyway. Bishop Dwayne D. Royster is married to the lovely Suzette Royster, and together they are the parents of two beautiful daughters. The Roysters reside in the greater Philadelphia area. Please join me in welcoming back to LTSP Bishop Dwayne Royster.
So quiet as kept, Dr. Paul was my advisor when I graduated from Lutheran, so it was an honor when he reached out and asked me to come tonight. I am so grateful to Dean Sebastian and all those that are gathered here. I see some of my former professors in the house. I see how many of you are members of Power congregations. Would you just lift up your hand if you're a member of a Power congregation? Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. I also want to acknowledge the Assistant Pastor of Worship and Liturgical Arts at Living Water United Church of Christ. The Reverend Nicholas O'Rourke is here with us tonight. And Dr. Robertson, you need to get that young man because he needs to come to Lutheran to do his seminary work. Amen. Amen. I am grateful to be here tonight and to share with you for just a little while. I want to be very clear that we are in a Kairos moment. We are also at war. And I use the language war because we are in the midst of great violence. We are in the midst of great violence, but this is a Kairos moment. I say that to you because I believe God is doing something special that has entered into Chronos time, human time, and is pulling together folk that would not otherwise come together to address the issues and the sin sickness of racism that exists in this country and is dealing with the issues of domination, as Rabbi Waskow talked about, around the world. Most recently, on the night that the grand jury refused to bring forth a true bill to convict Darren Wilson to bring so that the prosecuting attorney McCullough could bring forth a indictment against Darren Wilson, I was out on the street of Philadelphia at Arch Street United Methodist Church downtown Philly. We had a listening session where we actually streamed live the announcement coming from prosecuting attorney McCullough, and then right after that we went and joined hundreds of young people from all across the Philadelphia region as we were upset and angry about what was going on. Power made a statement that night, but it wasn't our night, it was young folks' night. And it was actually most interesting as Reverend O'Rourke and I were marching around with the young people. After about a mile or so, I was like, I got to go. They did 9 miles that night, and they were all over Philadelphia, and I thank God for PERP and SOUL and organizations like that taking the lead. But I said to Reverend O'Rourke, I said, what do you see when you look out here? And he's like, well, there's things going on. He said, you know, there's a lot of white folk out here. Mm-hmm. On that night, there were more white people in the street than there were black. There were more white folk in the street than there were black. The next day, there were more marches, and we were right out there with them as PERP was a student activist group from Temple University, was leading, and we were there in support and being very seen, but also trying to stay in the background as much as possible, because one of the things that we learned from the young folk in Ferguson, that they were very clear with the church folk that the reason that we are in this mess today is because you all failed us. You all are complicit in the insidiousness of racism that continues to perpetuate in this country. You see it, you knew it, and you chose to ignore it instead of standing up for the highest values. And so interestingly enough, in Ferguson, because I was down there just days after Mike Brown was killed, I went down there with several clergy from Philadelphia, including Reverend Mark Tyler, Mother Bethel AME, the Reverend Sean James from Grace Christian Fellowship, United Church of Christ, a Lutheran alumni, the Reverend Dr. Leslie Callahan from St. Paul's Baptist Church, the Reverend Ernie Flores from Second Baptist of Germantown. We went down on the ground and were there for over a week working with folk on the ground, and we had to deal with young folk that were mad because we were walking around with collars on, asking us the question, why didn't you fix this? Why didn't you address this a long time ago? Harvard University has a study that they did not too long ago on implicit bias, and I don't know if some of you might be familiar with the study, but there's this interesting thing that it did in studying how Americans view people of different races. And in this study that they did, they showed people a variety of images and took the time and measured the time that they responded or how they were trying to respond. And in the implicit bias study, they also measured inanimate objects and other animals at the same time. And what happened was, if you are a white male in this country, regardless of what race you are seen as most human. If you are Asian, you are seen almost as well as white folk, and Latinos are a little bit lower, and then there are black folk. But the particular study pointed out something incredibly interesting. The human mind in the subconscious lights up when it sees a black man the way it does when it sees an angry dog. That's everybody in this room. That's why when you walk down the street and you see 3 black teenagers coming at you, you know that they're not going to bother you, but you cross over to the other side of the street, or you clutch your pocketbook a little tighter when you see some young folk coming your way. It's that same implicit bias that causes Darren Wilson to get on television and begin to talk about the fact that it was a huge hawk. He was like some kind of animal coming at me. When I looked at Darren Wilson, who is 6'2" and 250 pounds, and he's complaining about a 17-year-old boy. When does jaywalking equal a death sentence? When does selling Lucy cigarettes equal a death sentence? When does having too much to drink and knocking on a door like Renisha McBride did to get some help that night equal a death sentence? When does 1.5 seconds on driving up to a young boy in a park, a 12-year-old boy in the park, equal a death sentence? We have to begin to ask ourselves this question. But what we really need to ask ourselves is, how do we plan to change the damned world?
All right.
How are we going to change the damned world? Because it is a world that we have a role in helping to create. Now, I want to suggest a few things to you that would probably not surprise you. That part of it is that we need to have a serious confrontation with ourselves about race. We need to have a serious conversation with her. I'm not talking about these kumbaya experiences that our denominations put together so we can have a conversation about race, so white folk can come in and cry about white privilege and get forgiven by black folk who walk out of the room still angry about the fact they had to go to the thing in the first place. I have been to far too many of them. I hate going to those things. They're an absolute waste of time.
Oh, boy.
I'm sorry if I'm offending anybody, but I didn't think you all brought me here to make you feel good. We are not going to have kumbaya moments in this time frame, nor should we want kumbaya moments in this time frame. We should not be talking about racial reconciliation in this time frame until we are fully prepared to see the humanity of the other and truly, honestly live that out on a daily basis. I'll tell you how deep this gets. Some years ago, before I went into ministry, I worked at a trash and steam plant in Chester, Pennsylvania, and I was dealing with some co-workers, and they loved me. They thought I was great. We went out to lunch and hanging out, and they were telling me how not racist they were and the whole 9 yards, and I'm like, okay, this is great. So one day, we're getting into this deep conversation about race, and the first thing that one of my co-workers, who was a white guy, he had 3 young daughters, well, 3 daughters that were my age, I should say young, we were in our early 20s at the time. And he was telling me how not racist he was, and he'd love to have me come home and meet his family, the whole 9 yards. And I said, hey, you know what? I saw the pictures of your daughter. You mind if I date one of your daughters? He said, I guess I'm not as non-racist as I thought I was. That's what I'm talking about, when it doesn't make a difference anymore what the color of the skin of the person walking through the door is, that we are able to have real conversation. That doesn't make a difference where Sunday morning is no longer the most divided hour in this country. That having 5 people of color in your congregation does not make you multicultural. It just means there are 5 folk there that don't want to go to the black church down the street. That we can really talk about what that looks like. Power, 41 congregations, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, humanists, who have been working, 40,000 Philadelphians that have been working diligently towards addressing the issues of race and putting race at the center of our work. We consider ourselves a racial and economic justice organization. We have been addressing the insidiousness of the systems of racism that pervade here in the city of Philadelphia. We've been working with low-income workers at the Philadelphia airport. We lost our first battle, but turned into a major victory as we flipped that battle around to be able to support subcontracted workers all across the city of Philadelphia to make sure that they're able to make $10.88 an hour. Philadelphia is one of the biggest plantations in this country. We have the poorest big city in America. 30% of our people live in poverty, but we have more people of color working low-wage jobs for big white corporations that are making money off their back and not sharing the profits with the people that work for them. We have to end a plantation mentality that we have with big corporations here who are continuing, excuse the expression, pimping the people that work for them on a daily basis. We have to address those issues. We have to begin to fight like we are right now for a full fair funding formula for students across the city, not only the state of across the state of Pennsylvania, but including the city of Philadelphia, where Power and one of its members, David Mazenkis from Germantown Jewish Center, did a study that laid out on a very clear map with information that we got from the Pennsylvania Department of Education that there's an $1,800 disparity between majority white school districts and majority black school districts across the state of Pennsylvania, and that white districts get more money per student than black districts do for every student across this study, which could turn into almost $1 billion a year for the school district of Philadelphia. Right. While I hear the issues that we are talking about today, I want to be very clear that what we have is not an issue of more people doing more mentoring programs. This is not an issue of more people providing direct service. We have an all-over systems failure that is going to require the people of faith to stand up and say the system is broken, and we will not stop fighting it until it is absolutely fixed.
All right.
So what can you do? What can you do? How can you change the damn world? You can say to yourself, well, I'm just one person in my congregation. If you have not preached about Ferguson yet in your congregation, you have a race problem.
All right.
If, as a denominational leader, you have not talked about Ferguson, you have a race problem. If you are afraid to bring up Ferguson for fear of what other people are going to say, you have a race problem. And you need to have an intense conversation with yourself. In the organizing world that I come from, in the PICO National Network, People Improving Communities Through Organizing, we believe that the first revolution is internal, and that you have to have an internal conversation before you can see external change. You've got to begin to deal with the deep issues on the inside. If you don't have folk of other colors over to your house for dinner or go out to dinner with them on a regular basis, you have a race problem. Wow, I got quiet in here on that one. Well, we don't really live in a neighborhood together. And go in the hood, find somebody. Amen, somebody. Amen, wall. Right? Amen, ceiling. It is going to take sustained systemic engagement over a period of time. And what we're really seeing right now in this Kairos moment is the beginning of what I believe will probably be a long-term movement. There are young folk in this moment that have not experienced the civil rights. Some of them might have read about it. Some of their school districts are voting out information about black history, so they don't even know about it. But what they are responding to is the inherent pain that they're feeling about their existence on a daily basis. I am so proud of the young people who are fighting right now.
All right.
I am so proud of the young folk that are leading us in many circumstances and getting some of us out of our pews and our pulpits into the street to begin to say that enough is enough and we can no longer tolerate that. I want to extend the invitation to you, be very clear, that you're welcome to join Power because we're going to be doing that work. We're going to be getting out in the street, we're going to be marching, we're going to be working on that. But we don't march without a purpose. We're not prepared to get arrested without a purpose. There's some things that we have to address. If I can just be a couple minutes just to explain very clearly what we're looking at here in the city of Philadelphia. Part of it in Philadelphia that we're looking to address right now is the fact that we have a civilian review panel that is under the control of the police commissioner and does not have any authority. That must change. We need to have an independent civilian review board that has teeth to it, that works in conjunction with a special prosecutor that is outside the realm of the DA's office with the capacity to indict people outside the role of the district attorney. So we need both a special prosecutor and we also need a civilian review board that has teeth, that is able to make decisions outside the role of the police department. I want to be very clear that the issues that we are facing are not going to be solved totally by insiders. We have to have people that can operate outside that are able to have influence on the inside of the work that we're doing. We also are, as with the Ferguson demands that have come up, we are demanding that the Department of Justice look into every police department that has egregious police behavior, especially those that have a long history of it, and begin investigations and indict those people with civil rights violations who have historically shown over and over again they cannot respect people because of race, color, creed, or sexual orientation. We believe that that is very important. We want police cameras on police officers, but we want police cameras on police officers if we're actually going to do something with the tapes that are coming from it. As we saw in Long Island, just because you have a tape doesn't mean anything's going to happen with it. We need things to happen with that. So we want to continue to fight, to press for that change, to press for real policy change that is actually impacting people both on the ground and in their homes and in their congregations and impacting their daily life. I'm going to end with this. Thank you, Doctor. I appreciate it. I was in Ferguson for a week. I was on the ground for 1 hour, and a shock grenade went off 10 feet from where I stood. A friend of mine, former music minister of my church, was beat up by the cops because he was taking pictures. And I have pictures of it that I posted on my Facebook page. We can no longer afford to have a police state in our cities. We must address change. We must call for the demilitarization of our police forces. We need to push for that in a very radical way so that we can continue to move forward. Thank you very much.
We have a special guest tonight representing the Sikh community. I'm delighted, and if you know anything about Sikhism, you understand their long commitment to nonviolence. Yashpal sing just a couple minutes, and then we'll open things up to the floor. Thank you. Please welcome him.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. I think destiny brought me here. I believe in destiny and hard work. And why do I say that? The destiny brought me here. Only this morning I got an email from Rabbi Vasco. I'm very grateful to that. I looked at and I found out this gathering is taking place. And what I try to do is anytime there's an interfaith gathering or anything related to with human rights, which basically this is, I try to be there. How many folks know about Sikh faith? Please raise hands. Well, about 10%. Okay. I know a thing or two about discrimination and the racial divide. I came to States as a young man back in 1973. I'm an engineer by profession. I've been in that profession about 45 years. Back in the 80s, I've been called, obviously, by some of the young, ignorant, people, Khomeini, and lately, 10 years ago, as Osama bin Laden. And thanks go to our news media, who make some ignorant people even more ignorant. And ignorance is never a blessing. We all know that. So, Sikh faith is the youngest religion. It's only about 500 years old. It was born and grew up in the middle of a very gloomy atmosphere in Southeast Asia, in India especially. The landscape was so gloomy, there was no human rights, and there was total, there were no justice. And we were born, Sikhs were born during that era, and from 1469 to about 1710, period of 250 years, that's when Sikh faith was born and it grew up. And sooner the religion was established. This was during the Mughal Empire. And took us 250 years for this religion to. It's okay. I'll speak up a little bit loud, and within 50 years, so that was 300 years after the religion was born, it was declared to be annihilated or eliminated by the Mughal rulers. The strength which the Sikh faith brings is human equality and justice for all. And I'll give a very quick example. Ninth prophet of Sikh faith was martyred because he stood up for the rights of Hindus. And he was martyred by the Mughal Empire at that time. So that gives you a little feel who Sikhs are. We stand up for injustice anywhere. We know injustice anywhere is loss of justice everywhere. And what we had here is total injustice. I do not need to elaborate on that. My learned, speakers, they have explained that what's happening here. So it's a racial divide and the injustice which we all are here to stand against. And that's what we have to do at this point, that we take this injustice, and spread it, the awareness like wildfire, and create total awareness in the community, which is happening. And so I think I give a little bit introduction about myself. So whenever you see a person with a turban, he's a Sikh. Okay? And, and one thing which goes with the turban, our 10th Guru gave us this appearance so that we cannot either run, we definitely cannot hide. Where there is injustice, we stand. We do not run. Thank you so much.
All right, I promise, going to hear from all of you, but we have one more special guest yet tonight. Officer Curtis Gee is here with us from the Philadelphia Police Department. Please join me in welcoming Officer Gee.
Hello, everyone. Didn't know what the forum's going to be. Didn't have nothing prepared, but I only have 3 minutes anyway, so I'm going to talk fast. Almost 22 years in Philadelphia Police Department. Born and raised in North Philadelphia. I had the privilege of patrolling North Philadelphia for 13 years. In the last 8 years, I've been in the counseling unit for the Philadelphia Police Department. Counsel all officers and their families. This is Warner, a good friend of mine, and invited me here tonight. Basically, with all that's going on today, and there is a lot going on, and like I tell you, I counsel the officers. On the theme of solution, as I always said, especially as a black man in a black community, I felt as though it's not only a privilege, black officer, you take up some time with these young guys. Unfortunately, there's a prejudice that I see, and I'm from the inside. I'm 46 years as a black man, almost 22 years as an officer. So I know both sides. There is a prejudice that's on both sides. You have cops riding in cars saying, look at those so-and-sos. And then the guys might be looking in the police cars, yeah, look at those MFs. So it's a prejudice there, but I and Tasha just found out that we actually crossed paths and didn't know it in the same facility where we go and talking to youth. It was one young guy, when they heard I was a cop, they were like, oh man. But one of the kids, I ended up adopting him, his mindset was so warped. But then when you get to the heart of the matter and you actually talk to them and not just put everybody in one box, I take this kid, we went out to lunch the other day, found him a job. This was in 2 weeks. So, like you said, if we have to affect change, I mean, this is beautiful. We are missing out on good people. Last thing with children, I found is like a smartphone. I had a flip phone. My daughter used to always say to me, Dad, you need to upgrade. I got a flip phone. But I'm sorry, a smartphone, but still with a flip phone mentality. See, with a flip phone, it was call people. But then somebody comes along and say, do you know you can text on that phone? And I say, really? I can text? Tasha say, send me an email. I can email. And then somebody else say, we can play games on this. And I'm like, wow. And I'm getting excited because of so much I can do. Same thing with the child. When you're just simply told that all you're going to be is just like your father. Nobody from North Philly ever going to be anything. When you're told these things, this is what you become to believe. And then you have a smartphone, but you're walking around with a flip phone mentality. So what it takes is someone like us to come and introduce them. And I'll say this last thing I learned, and I've always said this, and I spoke at the police academy the other week. Don't develop a us against them mentality. We cannot go around developing this mentality. And I'm getting a little older because I had a birthday a couple days before Natasha. But, oh, Lord. And I'm a minister, too. I graduated from cuts. But anyway, I'm gonna stop there because I totally forgot what I was gonna say. But if you have any questions afterwards, I will be here. God bless you.
Questions from the floor, please. And I'll recognize you as you raise your hands. Well, you've asked the question, so it must be appropriate. Question is, for the record, revolution, which means dismantling the military, corporate greed, and all of the rest. Would anyone on the panel like to take that up? Bishop Royster.
Yes. So I want to answer that, though, with a couple of things, and concern that I have, that a lot of times when we start talking about race, a lot of times we want to start pivoting to other issues. And I want to say, yes, I'm about generating revolution. Yes, we must dismantle the insidious systems of race that are in all forms of our government, all levels of government, and the ways that we see one another. And then when we do that, we can address the other stuff.
The assertion was ending the drug wars, repealing the criminalization of illicit street drugs as they exist. Taking those laws off the books. All right. Would anyone on the panel like to speak to that? Ms. Warner, you've worked with in that arena somewhat, haven't you? Have you not? Thank you for accepting my invitation to speak to that question.
The fumes. One of the things that I believe several times it was mentioned up here is when you talk about changing the law, I believe that it's a great opportunity to come together and have a voice. The Bishop mentioned that having that voice with the Citizens Advisory Commission, I believe that's imperative. That's a way to get your voice out there and get your concerns heard by the people on the front line who can make those decisions. So whatever it is, I would say create communities where you have that voice that can speak to those changes you like to see.
Thank you very much. All right, Bishop Royster.
I have a lot of opinions.
That's good.
But I want to address something about that too, and it's something I kind of wanted to point to earlier. The drug laws probably wouldn't be that difficult if they were uniformly enforced everywhere. Right, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation if white folk were, hit by these drug laws the same way that we were. Now we know this was part of Nixon's, war on drugs, the Southern strategy. This is how, there was a plan to keep power in this country. But I think, one of the things that brings me to is, I don't have a problem with police. I like police officers, right? I just want the uniformity of justice being meted out be the same in Chestnut Hill as it is in North Philly. All right, that's all we really want, right? And I think that's really important to say. I believe they have a role in our society, but I think when we spend a preponderance of our time in poorer communities because of their poverty and assume that they need more policing, and that policing, if you keep looking, you will find something. I believe in the homes in Chestnut Hill, if you keep looking, you'll find a whole lot of stuff, but nobody goes looking in those homes because there are lawyers standing outside the door protecting them.
All right. Another question, please. All right, Rabbi Waskow, please.
Well, I think talking about drugs as if they were all the same is just not accurate. PCP is incredibly destructive. Selling it should be against the law. I totally agree with what the bishop said about enforcing what laws we keep equally. I think the crucial reason that police action strikes the spark of rage is that there's a social contract, a covenant that says, hey, you're entitled to wear a weapon, and the deal is you act totally neutral about the people you're facing as to when you use it. And when that doesn't happen, then there's an eruption, and there ought to be. And I would add, marijuana is really different from PCP. It is far less destructive than alcohol. It's far less lethal than tobacco. So I think the content as well as the policing of these laws needs to be addressed as well. And I want to say something else. I was sort of trying to think about the question about revolution. So I want to quote one of the great change creators of the 20th and maybe as well the 21st century, Gloria Steinem, who in Philadelphia about 5-6 months ago said that she thought American society and maybe the world is at the moment like what happens when an abused woman walks out of the house. That's the moment of greatest potential freedom and the moment of greatest potential violence and coercion. And she said she thinks that's where we are. The bubbling up around issues of race, around issues of the very planet that we live in and eat from and breathe from. Those issues are bubbling at different rates and with different numbers, but they're all bubbling. The question is whether the coercion is going to attempt to smash that bubbling energy from below. And we may have to face that it will do it. The Supreme Court has done its best so far. And I saw an article, I think in the Times this morning, that says the police chiefs around the country are now conferring as to whether they've been too soft on the demonstrations of the last 3 weeks. Well, we will have to see, and we will have to respond if they decide to, quote, crack down.
Questions about education, and immediately I turn to Bishop Royster and power, because this is an issue they're working on. Yes, the question was the education in the city of Philadelphia, how split the schools are, how can we possibly build peace, move from fear, beyond fear, to flourishing if we don't have good schools. Bishop Royster.
I totally agree with you on that. That's part of the reason Power, in one of its 2 major campaigns, has been working on education. We recognize that there is a significant disinvestment in the Philadelphia public school system on the part of the state in terms of its responsibility to help educate the children in the city of Philadelphia. Part of the work that I was mentioning earlier when I was up there, that we did a study that showed this, we marked out the 500 school districts, and there are actually majority school districts in the state. And you can clearly see the line about how much funding it is. We have been utilizing our power and the power of there's 35 organizations across the state that have come together that are pressing for what we call a full fair funding formula, which is, yes, it is, the 4 Fs. We don't want you to get that on the report card, but we do want you to get that in terms of money for the schools, which will increase dollars that are going to go into public education, create a formula that's a weighted formula so that poverty and English as second language and others are weighted heavier, so you get more resources for that, as well as an achievement gap, which is a challenge here in Philadelphia, that when you have schools that have high achievement gaps, they need more resources to bring young folk up to speed. So part of, we're working heavily on that across the state. I've got 3 staff working full-time on this issue, plus our 40-plus congregations that are engaged in that fight every day.
Natasha Warner.
Well, it's not talk. It's not talk. It's not talk.
It's got to be money.
It's not talk.
I mean,
That's
let's
right.
be real.
We want the
All
cash.
right.
Show me the money.
I think Natasha is next, please. Yes, and then the rabbi also, hit my hand. We're going to have time for one more question. I'm a stickler for ending close to on time.
Just briefly, one of the, I follow Dr. Claude Anderson, and one of his, I don't know if anybody's heard of him, but you could research him. He's big on powernomics. That's his claim to fame. But he talks about, and I agree, that it's hard for a child, when you talk to these kids out here, it's hard for them to focus on education when their stomachs are empty. And so he talks about the 5 pillars for him is economics being the first thing a community needs. And then it's politics, and then, I mean, he breaks it all down, but politics, and then it's the law and courts, and then it's media, because it's the image for these youth, and then it's education. And I didn't really understand that, but when you look it up, you'll understand. But again, when I go out and talk to these kids, and I'm talking about, you get your education, you can be all you want to be. Well, they're telling me I'm hungry and I'm cold, and so when you talk about, education, you have to address economics first and foremost.
Rabbi Wesco?
I totally agree that the political pressure has to demand the shifting of resources to the public schools. And in Mississippi, 50 years ago, when the state was not providing education to black children, what the movement did was invent freedom schools. It may be that one of the things that Howard and others need to be doing is creating schools that address the issue of why the schools are so terrible. What the freedom schools did was talk about power. They suddenly made sense to kids who thought education, as they had been experiencing, it was totally senseless. And they were right. What they had been experiencing was totally senseless. The question is whether we can connect the learning of the stuff that gets people jobs with the learning of why it's been so hard for America to provide those jobs. That has to be connected, and maybe it will take really independent, not charter schools, but schools that come in the neighborhood by critics, movement critics of the structural system, to create such freedom schools as exactly was needed in Mississippi.
All right. Officer Dean.
I can speak to some degree on that. The Police Academy, I believe, is about 6 months of training. Each year we have ongoing training through the state. So every sworn police officer each year has different training, CPR, officer safety, different things of that sort. Whenever there's a hot topic, hot situation like this, we do. If it's not classroom training, we'll get some type of memorandum or something where it might be an inside the district or, where your commanders kind of keep you abreast of what's going on, the do's and the don'ts. But it is beyond the police academy. I've been out of there almost 22 years, so every year we constantly have legal updates. So we're constantly updating on an annual basis as to the things that's going on. Now, something that comes up like the Ferguson situation, all these other things, like I said, the commissioner might send out some type of memorandum as to say the do's and the don'ts, or some type of addendum to what's already been in place.
Training in de-escalation was the question.
Oh,
How to
training.
defuse tense situations so that force is the last option rather than the first.
Well, we have what's called a force contingent, meaning first, sir, put your hands behind your back, or we verbalize. Then next will be hand tactics. You might have to grab them. Then you go into your non-lethal weapons, the mace, taser, if you have one, and what's called an axe, that's the metal baton that we use. And then the last resort is lethal force. But sometimes you might go into a situation, I've been involved in 2 shootings myself, where I was shot at. And the other one, I had a 14-year-old kid come up behind me in a dark alley with a gun about that long. So, of course, in situations like that, you meet force with force. But yes, we are taught that you are supposed to be force with force. You can't use excessive force. One thing about our job is the use of force is a part of our job. Sometimes it's going to have to be, But there's a such thing as too much force. If somebody stole a bag of potato chips, you don't mace them and beat the crap out of them with a stick. But you put your hands on that. If they continue to fight with you, then you have to do what you have to do.
Training in nonviolence. Right. Yeah.
Well,
The question is about continuing education, and briefly.
Yeah, I'll just say real quick. Let me get you to understand this too. No scenario is going to be something that you can just draw and it's going to go just like that. We've had situations where unarmed suspects had to be shot. Why? Because weapons were taken from the police
One guy was tased, he looked at it like this and pulled it out, and then he took the taser and tased the officer. So he had the result in shooting him. But one thing has to be understood. No, like some people, I hear a lot of stuff and it's like it's supposed to be textbook. But this stuff is not textbook. You know, I mean, this is not a little dog who's not going to resist.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Officer D, and thank you for the question as well. Wow, appreciate that. But I'm going to exercise the prerogative as the moderator and chair to say, you know, what a place to wind up, really, talking about lethal force. And I'd like to take us back to the fact that we have here at the table representatives of faith communities who emphasize weapons of the Spirit. That is, right? Training in ways to build peace proactively, not reactively, by organizing communities, by learning together, by using this amazing gift that we've been given of our brain, and the skills of reasoning and articulation and language. Don't underestimate what happens simply by being present at an event like this and gathering together in a spirit of learning and in a spirit of wanting to move from fear to flourishing after Ferguson. I'm so grateful to each of you for being here tonight, and I do hope to see you here again on campus in the future. And please thank once more our speakers for tonight. Thank you.